Hello and welcome to the Cradle News Roundup, a one-stop shop for all news West Asia. My name is Esteban Carrillo. I am the head of news for the Cradle. As usual, I'm joined by my colleague, Karim Shami, content creator and writer for the Cradle. And today, we have a very special guest. Joining us is columnist and editor for the Cradle, Sharmeen Narwani. Hello, Sharmeen. So good to have you on.
I know. It's good to finally join you guys.
I know. It's been a long time coming. So we have many things to talk about this week, and I think the best place to start is with the U.S. strikes in Iraq, Syria, and Yemen this week that were conducted in retaliation for the killing of 3 U.S. soldiers by a resistance attack in a U.S. base in Jordan. Now, the U.S. says they have hit 85 targets in Iraq, and I don't think they specified how many they hit in Syria. They say these are against Iran-backed militias, that are being launching attacks against the U.S. bases, over 160 attacks in over 3 months. But what has this achieved? Because just this morning, as we're recording this, the resistance in Syria launched a new attack against the Al Omar oil field, which is Syria's largest oil field, occupied by the U.S. with the help of the Syrian Democratic Forces, killing 7 SDF fighters. So the U.S. launches this attack. They are essentially, on the verge of sparking a new regional war, and it's supposed to de-escalate. How is this de-escalating anything, and how is this achieving anything if the resistance is still able to just, launch attacks again?
It's a very good question because 85 targeted sites is a lot. The death toll that we're hearing so far from Iraq is 16 or 17 dead and 3 dozen wounded. Among them, I think I saw yesterday were 3 doctors, physicians who work for the Hashd al-Shabi, the Iraqi anti-ISIS fighting force. And at the same time as these attacks were going on, and this is something the Cradle wrote about and not many others did, was ISIS suddenly revived that very same night and targeted the exact same forces
in Anbar.
Yes, in Anbar province that the Americans are striking. So we're seeing a convergence of U.S. and ISIS interests suddenly in the military theater in Iraq. And it, raises a lot of question marks. Did they take advantage of the security vacuum for the few hours that the U.S. was striking, or was it a coordinated effort, as many in Iraq believe? What did they achieve? It's really not sure. One thinks that we get to the point of a military strike when other options are no longer viable. Whereas in the case of the Americans, it often is the military strike is the first point of reference, the first tactic employed. If they were meaning to severely deplete the capabilities of their enemy, they haven't done that. Almost immediately, Iraqi resistance forces struck back at targets.
They've been hitting again. They issued a statement. They said this one in Al Omar, it was them. They took responsibility. It was a drone attack. And then it's very interesting that you bring up the ISIS attack, because it did happen exactly under the cover of these U.S. airstrikes. So it really feels, like the Islamic State, they're not keeping up any forms anymore. They're just like, we're going to support the people who have been supporting us for so long, because in the end, the United States has mainly benefited from the presence of ISIS. They're never the ones who are targeted by them. It's always these Iranian-backed militias or so on and so forth. But the attacks are also coming at a very, a crucial point in Iraq, because the Iraqis, they want the U.S. out. The Prime Minister has been talking about this. After the attacks, after the U.S. strikes, the PMU, the Hashd, they met with Soudani. They told him that they've been attacking, they gave him a account of the death. And then there's Iraqi officials saying in a letter to the people in the U.S., telling them, when you hear that attacks in Iraq are against Iranian militias, it's not true. This is false, because what they're actually hitting, he says, are aimed at Iraqi national forces associated with the Popular Mobilization Forces, an official government entity.
Yes, the Hashd al-Shabi or PMUs are part of the Iraqi military, under the Iraqi military umbrella. So they are actually, the Americans are hitting Iraqi security forces. like I said, what did the Americans achieve? They did not minimize the capabilities or remove the capabilities of the forces that were targeting their bases. It was a show of force. It was what the Americans do. It's the sledgehammer approach to everything. Almost mirrors what the Israelis are doing. Like their goal, their stated objective in Gaza is to remove Hamas's capabilities and wipe out the Palestinian resistance. But in fact, that's simply not the case. And it's exactly the same approach the Americans take, a big show of force where you cannot calculate actual objectives reached. And I mean, that goes, for the matter, almost all U.S. wars in the region, occupation of Afghanistan for 20-odd years, of Iraq for 20-odd years. What have they accomplished? So I think this was a big show. Let's not forget this is a presidential election year in the United States, and Joe Biden, who is deeply unpopular right now across the spectrum in U.S. polls, has to show that the Americans are on top of their game, which in fact they're not. If you any close scrutiny of these American attacks, whether in Yemen against Ansar Allah and its blockade of Israeli destined ships in the Red Sea, or in Iraq or Syria, the Americans have not depleted the capabilities or changed the battlefield on the ground whatsoever.
It's very interesting that you bring up Yemen, because inside Yemen, we're seeing something that we're also seeing across the region, and that is shifting allegiances. Because Yemen has been at war for 9 years between the Ansar Allah forces and the Saudi-backed coalition, which includes the UAE. And now we have a feature from a few days ago in the Cradle that is titled "Yemenis Ditch UAE-Saudi Coalition for Gaza." And what it essentially explains is that these former, or I don't know, maybe still Saudi-backed officials, they are saying enough is enough. We can no longer be part of a government or of a militia, of an army that supports what the U.S. is doing, that supports the attacks against Ansar Allah, that in the end are in support of Israel. In the end, these are to allow Israel to continue doing what it's doing in Gaza, because Ansar Allah, the Islamic resistance in Iraq, the Hezbollah, they're all saying that our actions are so that this stops. And then you have Arab states in the Gulf states, or you have these Arab leaders in Yemen that are being pushed to take that stance. In Yemen they're being pushed. The Gulf leaders, they don't need that much push, to be honest.
So I think what's happening now in the region is that all the masks are falling down. Like previously, the U.S. and other Arab states, they pushed the propaganda against Hashd al-Sha'bi, against Hezbollah, against the Syrian regime. And unfortunately, now we see many people across the Arab world, they had these entities or these parties or this government according to the propaganda that was pushed like for more than 15 years. But in Yemen, they didn't use all this propaganda against the Houthis. Only UAE and Saudi Arabia, they pushed this propaganda internally to justify their war against the Houthis. When they took the decision to target Israeli mount ships, and then they started to target Eilat in southern Israel, all the Arab world started to support the Yemenis because there was not enough propaganda in the region against the Yemenis, and nobody has hatred towards the Yemenis. So now we're saying that the Yemenis is getting more popular, and that's what our feature talks about. And that led to divisions inside the factions that are supported by Saudi Arabia and by UAE. And now we are seeing many factions going back to Sana'a and leaving the Saudi-led coalition.
So one thing that's, I've learned since the Cradle started, because we've had some extraordinary articles written by Yemeni and other writers on the subject of Yemen from a different perspective, not covering just the human rights, the siege, etc., but the resistance, the geopolitics of the war in Yemen, which I think the Cradle really specializes in doing, and I don't see elsewhere, is that Yemen for whatever reason, it doesn't matter across the board, background, sect, none of that seems to matter, is very pro-Palestine as a country. Many talk about Yemenis being the true original Arabs. Yemen is the country where Fusha, the classical Arabic language, is spoken on the street. It is a very Arabist state, the most Arabist state, if you will. And so has never dropped the ball on the issue of Palestine and Gaza and its outright hostility towards Israel, which is why in this, with the U.S. UK strikes against Yemen, and this is just the latest occurrence, but from the beginning of the Israeli war against Gaza, we started to see the coalition, the Western and Saudi UAE-backed coalition, begin to fray. The UK-US strikes are recent, but for over 3 months, close to 4 months, we have seen growing hostility on the street of southern Yemen and eastern Yemen that is dominated by the Saudis and the UAE coalition against the war in Israel. And this is where the coalition Yemeni views coalesce with the views of Ansar Allah, the Houthis in the north, in the capital city of Sana'a, right? So it's become almost unbearable because now these southern coalition Yemenis are standing on the side of the countries that are supporting Israel's brutal assault on Gaza, that they're supporting, attacking Yemen over the transit of Israeli-bound vessels in the Red Sea. It's inconceivable for them to be on the other side. This is a unified Yemeni stance, which is why increasingly we are seeing commanders and officers, as well as the rank and file, in these coalition militias, the UAE and Saudi-backed coalition militias, defect. I mean, we've had entire battalions defect now, and pledge, not just defect, but pledge their allegiance to Sana'a and to Ansar Allah specifically. And the Saudis and the Emiratis and their Western partners have really struggled with this. We unearthed in this recent article we did last week that there was a top secret document signed off by the Ministry of Defense, the Saudi-backed Ministry of Defense in Yemen, instructing their forces to suppress any sympathy for the Palestinian cause. And for Hamas and for Ansar Allah. And what happened is a number of officers ended up in Saudi jails, Saudi-run jails. So senior commander types ended up in Saudi jails for like 50 days or so, along with the rank and file. And this, started this slew of defections. But you have regular Yemenis too, who have risen up against this. They're burning pictures of UAE leader Mohammed bin Zayed. They're burning the Israeli flags. This is in coalition-controlled areas. Religious leaders who are in coalition areas, one of them possibly the most prominent personality in all of eastern Yemen, which is controlled by the Saudis, has absolutely supported Ansar Allah's attacks on Israeli-bound vessels. And, that this is a Yemeni right to do this. This is a Yemeni responsibility to do this, to aid our brothers in Palestine and in Gaza. So Yemen's interior domestic situation has shifted so dramatically in these last 4 months. It's almost unrecognizable, and nobody's writing about it, But, I mean, except the Cradle, of course.
Yeah, of course. And in addition to their support to Palestine, people should also know that the economy under Ansar Allah-controlled areas is better than that's under UAE and US-backed governments. And also the crime rate under Ansar Allah-controlled area is much less than other areas where there's dominance of UAE and Saudi Arabia. So they didn't even know how to rule.
Yeah, because to your point, Sharmeen, about over the past several months, how things have changed. In Yemen, discontent against the UAE-backed, the Saudi-backed administrations go back for over a year, more than a year. These protests against the economic situation. And just, Gaza kind of just brought it all together, And I think it's very interesting that what you're saying, and like this is a duty for the Yemenis, but shouldn't it be a duty for Saudi Arabia? Shouldn't it be a duty for the UAE? Shouldn't it be a duty for Jordan and Oman and so on and so forth?
Well, we're actually seeing those shifts. I mean, there haven't been a lot of polls. There were some initial polls, and I think the results were so bad for the West and their allies in the region that maybe polls got cut off, because really one would think this is the exact time that people should be polling populations to see these seismic shifts in perceptions occurring throughout the Arab world. So, about a month or so ago, I did a piece on 3 polls that were taken in the early days. And what we saw, one was a poll in Tunisia. And what was interesting is the Tunisian poll was taken 3 weeks before October 7th and then 3 weeks after. And in that 6-week period, we see a significant shift. But the pollsters of this, the Arab Barometer poll, say that Tunisia, if there's one Arab country that is a bellwether state for the Arab world, it is Tunisia. So they pretty much hold the views that they gathered in Tunisia as being representative of Arab views throughout the region. And that poll and another, a Washington Institute poll conducted in Saudi Arabia, showed some massive changes in perceptions in a very short period of time. Basically in Saudi Arabia, which was next on the chopping block for normalization with Israel before the events of October 7th scuttled that.
Still is a bit. They're still looking.
Well, I mean, you have well over, I think it's 97% of Saudis who are against normalization, okay? And their perception of states who have normalized with Israel is deteriorating significantly, which basically goes to the heart of the legitimacy and credibility of U.S.-backed leaders throughout the Arab world. And this is critical because the other thing we're seeing is, what happened after October 7th? No. What happened after the Israelis launched their war in Gaza? Saudi Arabia wrangled 2 summits in its capital in Riyadh. One was an all Islamic State summit, and one was an Arab League summit. And nothing was said and nothing was done from that very important summit, those 2 very important summits. The Emiratis and the Jordanians have trucked supplies that were unable to reach Israel because of Ansar Allah's blockade of the Red Sea. They're trucking supplies from the UAE via Saudi Arabia, via Jordan to Haifa to reach Israel. That's what the Emiratis and the Jordanians have done after the Gaza war, okay? The Qataris, a major mediating player in the region, are mediating and negotiating for the release of Israeli hostages. Turkey's exports to Israel from November to December, so after the events of October 7th, went up 35%. So the Arab states who have, waved the flag of Arabism and Palestine and all the other causes are visibly deficient in addressing the Palestinian cause, at addressing the shift in Arab sentiment towards the region. They're not being seen as credible deterrences to Israel's actions in Gaza. Whereas what's happening on the flip side, the Iranian government, Hezbollah, Hamas, Ansar Allah, the Iraqi resistance, their popularity has gone through the roof in the Arab world, on the Arab street. People are holding up pictures of Abdel Malik al-Houthi. They're using the triangle of Hamas in the videos, showing this is our Israeli target, like a the red triangle that appears on it. Boom! They're using it across social media. But importantly, in a country like Tunisia, in the Tunisian poll, it showed that perception of Iranians in Tunisia, of Khamenei specifically, because the poll asked about Khamenei, went up so significantly that he was equal to or sometimes surpassed the polling numbers for Saudi's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and UAE leader Mohammed bin Zayed. What is this? Khamenei over these. So there's a massive shift in the region. And to be honest, the longer the Israel's war against Gaza goes on, and the more the Americans and their junior British partners strike at resistance targets, the more Arab sentiment and Muslim sentiment is going to shift towards the resistance axis, which is, an explosion for the Americans, because let's be honest, since the time of the Islamic Revolution in Iran, 1979, there's been nothing but negative narratives pushed in this region, very effectively causing strife within countries and throughout the entire region. Sunni versus Shia, Iranian versus Arab, secular versus religious. And these have divided the region very successfully. And suddenly now you have absolute unity on who the bad guy and who the good guy is in. And it wipes out every other consideration.
I think one of the most telling things that it showed this, in my view, was that picture from the Jordanian school, the superhero day, when half of the kids were Abu Ubaidah and the other half were nurses and press. They had the little press with the flag.
So this is a picture that went viral, I think, on social media, showing it was a Jordanian school where they said, wear a superhero outfit for the day, and you saw one Spider-Man. And then the rest of them were in Palestinian resistance or, rescue service clothing, journalists, etc. And that was crazy. In Jordan, the kids know who the heroes are now.
Because in our region, we have real heroes.
Yeah, correct. Actually, that's true, because the superheroes were real people as opposed to, guys who can shoot webs out of their wrists.
Yeah, they didn't even play neutral. They are now involved with Israel against the Palestinians. And the Jordanians, in addition to what Sharmin said, they also downed missiles and drones coming from Iraq and from Yemen towards Israel. And the Egyptians, they did the same, and Saudi Arabia did the same. If they kept their neutrality that we see in the media, but we know what's happening under the tables, then I don't think these polls will be the same. But because they are really now involved, and everybody knows that regarding the video that we did.
You mean the land route?
And previously, in the first few days, we knew that Jordan downed drones and missiles, and they even asked the U.S., we want more air defense systems to counter the threats. So they were very open about it.
But speaking of Jordan and the superheroes, we really should get to discussing the land route from the UAE to Haifa, because that is, it's tangible treachery. It doesn't matter what the rulers of the UAE and Saudi Arabia and Jordan have to say anymore. This is a tangible treachery, all right? The Israelis have been besieging Gaza for 2 decades, and these Arab states, these 3 Arab states, are preventing Israelis from feeling the same punishment. They're helping them. And now Jordan, we know, has gone to great lengths to distance themselves from it. They've even said there's no goods transiting our border. But then the Israelis videotaped the transit of trucks through the Jordanian border. And there was this great video footage where you have, it's so obviously staged, but you have an Israeli border officer asking a truck driver, hello, my name is Shlomo whatever. What's your name? And the guy says, Jihad. And he goes, welcome to Israel. Where would this happen? So, this was so funny to me, that one video clip. It's really something we should have circulated, because it's a joke in and of itself. But now there's visual evidence that these trucks are transiting through Jordan. And don't forget, Jordan is over 50% Palestinian in origin. And the most catatonic Palestinian population I've seen anywhere in this world. They'll speak up in the US, they'll speak up in Israel, they'll speak up in Australia, but they're just silent in Jordan because of the fear of God that's been put into them by the Jordanian government, meaning you're either Jordanian or you're not. right? So Palestinians have always shied away from supporting their causes in Jordan, but now Jordan is taking goods to Israel while it's bombing the hell out of Gaza, where they don't allow basic goods. So how this will play out in Jordan, I don't know. But it to me, it's the most interesting scene, because if Jordan gets eliminated from this land route, well, there is no land route to Israel anymore.
Yeah, especially now we're seeing that the war is almost 4 months. And whenever the war expands and it stretches in time, we see more involvement of these countries, especially Jordan now. Everybody's talking about Jordan. First, the attack came inside Jordan, as the U.S. claimed, and the U.S. response came from Jordan. And of course, now we see the land route. So now Jordan, and the king of Jordan now is like...
It's going to be persona non grata very quickly in this region. So talking about the land route, just because... So Al-Sarraj essentially puts out the ports out of commission. The Israeli ports out of commission. They're empty. They're completely empty. And, you know, the U.S. comes in with their big guns, with their troops, and they can't do anything to stop them. The attacks continue. So all of a sudden you have UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan allowing this land corridor through their territory. And the only thing I want to bring up here is, honestly, do you guys remember when last year Bezalel Smotrich went to New York and he gave this speech in which he said there's no such thing as a Palestinian people, and he had the map in front of him, and it was the map of what they like to call Greater Israel, which includes Jordan and part of Saudi Arabia. And these are the people they want to normalize with.
You know, I mean, when we talk about a slavish Arab ruling mentality, this is it in a nutshell, you know, going against their own national interests, undermining their own nation state in order to serve Israeli and U.S. interests. This is why I think this Gaza war is so frightening to them, because every day that it continues further undermines their legitimacy as Arab leaders. You know, I mean, and they're not insignificant ones, because, you know, the king of Saudi Arabia is the custodian of the two most holy sites in Islam, Mecca and Medina. And King Abdullah of Jordan is the custodian of the third holiest site, which is Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. And these folks are absolutely betraying Islam, not just the Palestinians and not just the Arab street. So the longer this continues, the more their credibility and legitimacy erodes. And that's going to be a huge problem for the so-called moderate Arabs in the region, from Morocco, right? From Morocco to the Persian Gulf, to the Levant, Jordan, to even the Palestinian Authority, because these guys are essentially propped up by Washington and its allies.
And it becomes so much clearer now. You know, before maybe they could find a way to defend themselves, but at this point it's apparent. It's apparent who they're working for, who are they working in favor of. And it's the Israelis who, to this day, are still killing children in Gaza, are still bombing hospitals.
But as their credibility diminishes, someone else's is rising, right? So it's not just the so-called moderate Arab credibility, but it is also their U.S. and their UK allies. So major powers and the region's major leaders, right? On the other hand, you have another kind of regional leadership that is really within the axis of resistance. So in terms of states, Iran and Syria, and then non-state actors in Lebanon, Iraq, and Yemen that are on the rise, but also the neutral states. So in some of these Arab polls, you saw the neutral states like Russia and China on the rise too. And this is very dangerous for the Americans. I mean, I don't see how they can... the more they strike, the more people turn against them.
Yeah, and the Americans are making a big mistake, I think, currently, because they used to say everything about what's happening in the regions, Iranian-backed, Iranian militias, and they are still using the same propaganda, but on people that are targeting Israel, which is, me as an Arabian, is like, it was a dream since we were young to see missiles getting fired on Israel in retaliation of their bombings inside Lebanon, and inside Palestine, and even inside Syria. So telling the Arabian population that these are Iranian-backed, we're giving like a free credit to Iran. Although Iran, I don't think Iran, as they stated, they don't fully control them, or they don't control them. They have, like, of course, influence over them. But Sayyid Hassan was so clear that we don't take orders from Iran, and I believe him. And in Yemen, they say the same thing.
But we see it in action. We see it in action, Yemen, what they're doing, they are doing because they believe.
Yeah,
this is
that's what are they saying. And even the United States released, for me, it's a stupid statement 2 days ago when they said that we bombed Yemen in response to what happened in Jordan. What the Ansarullah have to do of 3 U.S. soldiers that were killed in Jordan? That's absurd.
But don't you see that kind of this war has become so unfocused for the Western side? Unfocused meaning you have to have an objective in a war. You have to have a clear aim. You have to have things that you can quantify as successes and victories. And you have this scattershot approach to everything. Now, it's easy to attack a state if a government launches an action, but the Iranians and the Syrians are the only states within the resistance axis, and they've done nothing. But it's much harder to go after non-state actors who, in some instances, work as large militant groups, in some instances work as political parties, in some instances as cells. How are you can't, it's, one of our articles was called, I think, swarming the Americans, because it was such a good word, because the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, has this naval tactic of using speedboats, multiple speedboats, even dozens of them, to swarm unwelcome ships in their waterways or around their waterways. And it's a very interesting tactic because you can't target that. First of all, they're fast, and then what are you hitting anyways? There's going to be more of them. And it really is a great analogy. It's like, what happens if a couple of dozen bees come at you? You can be the most stoic, the strongest human being, but you will cover your face, you will fall to the ground, or you will run, or you will jump in water. And this is kind of how I'm seeing what the U.S. and the Israelis are up against. A swarm. You can't win against a swarm that's region-wide. I mean, I'm sure the Pentagon has run exercises on how to deal with the naval swarms of the IRGC in the Persian Gulf, but not a region-wide swarming. And what is your aim? What is your objective? How do you measure success? You can't. And every day this continues. The narrative works against you. So when we look at the YNAB poll that was done in Saudi Arabia, we see that almost 90%, I think 80% of Saudis agree with the idea that recent events show that Israel is so weak and internally divided that it can be defeated someday, which is a refrain of Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah from the year 2000 when the Israelis were kicked out of Lebanon, where he says Israel is weaker than a spider's web. But now we're seeing the Americans weaker than a spider's web. The overwhelming majority of Arabs now believe that the Arabs, the Palestinians and the Arabs have already won this war against Israel. And that is a considerable shift.
Yeah, just, because you said it yourself, the narrative is going against them when you were talking about the U.S. And I remember that John Kirby last week, he said this, and this is the most ridiculous quote, but it just goes to the heart of how they're trying to portray this. And he says that he doesn't agree with a description that all of these, little wars are part of the same conflict. The White House wants to portray this as being one thing is completely opposite from another. What's happening in Iraq is not related to what's happening in Gaza, and it's not related to what's happening in Yemen, and it's not related to Syria. We're dealing with it in our own way. But this just shows you that, they are lying to everyone's faces.
I think despite U.S. efforts to compartmentalize these conflicts, and pretend that it's not all connected to Gaza, what happened on October 7th and the brutal genocidal assault of Israel on the Gaza Strip and its populations thereafter is it will not work. It simply will not work. Everybody sees what's happening. And it's so important. As John Kirby says, no, these are separate conflicts and must be separated. We have to reiterate that it is a swarm. It is a swarming of over the Gaza issue, that no country, no leader, no military that supports Israel's actions in this region will be immune from the swarming. You know, it's the most critical way of looking at it. Let him compartmentalize while we swarm. End of.
Yeah, and I think what's happening in the region, and we see like the U.S. doesn't have a clear aim, because all the wars since maybe World War II, they are the ones who designed these wars. And we see after 9/11, we have this famous a general who spoke and said that they told me that we will attack Syria, then Lebanon, then Sudan, and it happened. So usually they have this plan that spans for 10 years or maybe 15 years. But what happened 7 October, they found themselves inside a war they didn't design. So I think this tell us why the US even their statement is not clear. Their statements are not clear, and their actions are like not effective. Especially that they had a war in Afghanistan for 20 years, and they fought these groups. And we know that the resistance and the Arabs, they are more qualified than the Afghanis, and they should know that there's nothing they can do to stop these groups. The only solution is to stop the war in Gaza, as all these groups said, including Hezbollah, Ansarullah, and the Iraqi resistance. They said to stop the war in Gaza, and we will stop. This is the only solution.
But John Kirby don't believe in that.
Yeah, but still they are bombing Sana'a and Saada, and currently, unfortunately now, while we are speaking, the U.S. bombed Al-Hudaydah, which is a crucial city for the Yemenis, because it holds the only port under the Ansarullah controlled areas. As Sharmin said at the beginning, it's only a show of power. There's no political or even military advantage of what they are doing in the region, except show of power.
There's no military victory without a military objective. By the same token, the other side has very clear objectives: the removal of all U.S. troops and bases from this region, and the dissolution of Israel. And that does not mean wiping Israel off the map. It just simply means if you want to live as an equal to Palestinians, then stay. You know, if you don't, you're not welcome. So the dissolution of Israel and the establishment of Palestinian statehood. Very clear objective on one side. Swarming means to achieve those objectives. No clear military objective on the other side. There can't be a victory for the Americans or the Israelis.
So I think that's a perfect place to leave this conversation off. Thank you so much for watching. We'll hope to see you next week. Please leave a like, subscribe, and follow us on X, on Telegram, and on Instagram. And if you're feeling generous, please leave a donation on our Patreon page. For the Cradle News Roundup, my name is Esteban Carrillo. I have been joined by Karim Shamin and Sharmin Narwani.